How is this?
That's good.
Good? All right, I think we're good. We're good to go. Welcome, everyone. So exciting to see lots of people here for this presentation. You know, this is our 12th annual series of the History Festival, which translates into about 70 presentations, which is really awesome. And it's been supported from the very beginning by the Washburn Heritage Association and the Washburn Area Historical Society. And we always have sponsors in addition that help us out. And for this particular one is the Apostle Island Historical Preservation Society. So let's give them a hand. So those of you who've been here before, I know that I see a lot of familiar faces. Anybody who's never been here before to our History Festival? Welcome, awesome. Thank you for coming. And for those of you here, in case you don't know, you can go to our website, washburnheritage.org. On the front page, on the lower left-hand side, is an icon for History Festivals. If you click on that, it will take you to 40 of our festivals that have been videotaped, thanks to Andrew Grimm, our videographer, who makes DVDs for our presenters and then uploads them, and they're all up to date. He is up to date as of the last series. So if you want to see something more than once, it's right there and very, very well done. The other thing I want to mention is it takes a number of people to make this History Festival happen. And this month, if you have not yet received or would like to get one, I have lots in the back. Our newsletter features on the front page, on the inner page, how the History Festivals come about every session. And the folks who are involved in doing this is Ginny Peterson, who's our chair for this, Andrew Grimm, our videographer, Ella Cross, Gary Holman, Sandy Johnson, Carla Bremner, David Bradley, and Lynn Adams, who's our technical person, thank goodness for Lynn, and Lorraine Young, who's joining the group as well. So these folks work all through the year to find speakers, get them set up, make sure we have all the right equipment. So let's give them a hand. All right, so if any of you would like one of these, see me at the end. They go out to our members. If you want to be a member, there's a possibility in the back, but a great story of how they work and what they do to make this all happen. And with all that said, I would like to ask Dick Olson to come on up, and he's going to introduce our speaker for tonight. And thank you for coming.
Good evening all, and welcome to the Tony Woiak History Series. I'm pleased, and you will be too, to have Darren Miller, Supervisor of the State of Wisconsin Fish Hatcheries at Brule and Bayfield, as our presenter this evening. I'm Gary Holman's understudy, and I have studied every bit of his dialogue and part that he has in this, and he showed up. But I'm taking the royalties, Gary. Darren is a self-confessed history buff who is anxious to illuminate the colorful history of the Bayfield Fish Hatchery, and I introduced Darren Miller.
So good evening. Get this.
You gotta talk right into it.
Right into it. How's this? Better? Okay. So again, my name's Darren Miller. I'm the Operations Supervisor for the Voight Hatchery and the Rural Hatchery as well. A little bit about myself is I've been working in fish culture for about 30 years. 15 years were in Washington State, and I've since come here and now work here in Bayfield. So my office is there. One of the things that really attracted to me to the area was the old building sitting out front. So I've really done a lot of research on my own. Had a lot of help. Bob Nelson up in Bayfield, right above the hatchery, has really helped me out a lot in a lot of the research. We've been finding a lot of things recently. We'll get into that. So I guess to start out with, the first person to really settle in Pikes Creek was Elijah Pike. And he brought his family over in 1855. And they purchased the old American Fur Trading Post, which was up at the forks in the creek about 1.5 miles upstream of the hatchery. And when we're all done, you're more than welcome to come up. These are photocopies of the original prints and plot book from 1895. So you can see where the R.D. Pike residence was and the Pike family homesteaded up there in the creek. So Robinson, which was his son, he's pretty well known in Bayfield. He started up a lot of things like the first telephone company, the first power company, had the ice house up in Bayfield, one of the largest mills. Huge entrepreneur back then. But him and his father, when they settled up in the creek, they started a fish hatchery in 1864. So this is the old homestead up at the forks in the creek. And right after they got there, they pretty much took every tree in sight. It was all logged off, and it was pretty much denuded forest, which was some interesting pictures back then. So when they started their fish hatchery just downstream, this was the original Pike hatchery in 1886. They dug the hand flume. They operated it all the way until 1895, when it started to get a little costly for them. And one of the main reasons why R.D. Pike was actually starting the fish hatchery was they started to notice the commercial harvest was going up and the fishing population was going down. He started one of the roads that went through the hatchery, the old Minneapolis-St. Paul Highway, as they called it back then. And he used to have a toll on fish that would pass up through the road, through his property, to go to Minneapolis to be sold. So he didn't want to see those fishing numbers decline. So in 1895, there was a gentleman by the name of Curry Bell, and he was kind of a politician in the area. He was also on the State Fisheries Commission. And he was kind of put into a task of finding a fish hatchery, a location for a fish hatchery for the state in northern Wisconsin. And some of the options were in Superior, Fort Wayne, Ashland, and Bayfield. So after he talked to one of his friends, Robinson Pike, and they kind of agreed that Pikes Creek was a good spot, and the fact that him and his dad were getting a little tired of taking care of the hatchery. This gentleman here, Isaac Wing, he owned about 40 acres of land that he also donated to the state, and so did Colonel C.P. Rudd. The largest portion was Pike, and it was right around 300 acres that he donated to the state. These gentlemen were pretty smart. They also wrote into the contract that as long as the state raises fish for the people of the state, that we can continue to use the land. So the day that we stop raising fish for the public, the land has to go back to its family or heirs. So that was kind of a neat little thing that they've written out. So after they agreed to it, they drew up the first kind of sketch on where they were going to be. They took it to the Fish Commission. And as you can see, right there is where they put the hatchery. Also, and this is R.D. Pike's new residence. They actually built that in the upstream here was where the old Pike farm was and the Pike hatchery. So after they secured the property and they wrote everything up, they drew up a little more detailed plans on what they were going to do for ponds, how they were going to lay, water flow, where the pipes were coming from. And they built the hatchery, the first building. When they built this building, they were looking at other facilities around the world, and this ended up being the largest fish hatchery in the world at the time. So some pretty impressive numbers came out of this facility once it was in full operation. Late 1800s, early 1900s, we're talking 37 million fish were produced per year. This one is recently been found as well. So one of my things here is I looked at the salary for the superintendent, and his first year's wage was $800, which equated to 38 cents per hour. I'm starting to feel pretty lucky. One of the other ones, that entire building is beautiful. Has everybody seen the building as you're driving by? Beautiful building. Total cost was $9,000, which is amazing to me. So that's, according to Google, that is what the value of that $9,000 is today. $330,000. I don't think you can get the foundation done for that. Doesn't seem like that's right, but that's, Google says everything. So. One of the other things that I thought was amazing, when you read the 1897, some of the Fisheries Commission reports, and they've done these reports every year. They put out how many fish were produced. This dates back all the way to the 1870s. And when they started talking about the hatchery, one thing that truly amazed me was up in here. It talks about they started the hatchery in 1897 and finished it in 1897.
Wow.
And that, to me, that's baffling. That, today's time, we can't even build a house in that time, it seems like. But they were able to construct that, essentially a 4-story building, out of brick, out of rock, sandstone, and produce it. So down here in the bottom, it talked about digging the trench for the pipeline. And that pipeline that they dug was, I'm having problems with my buttons here. It was a wooden pipe wrapped in wire or banded by metal. And they actually built that on site and placed it. And some of the areas, as you can read here, were 20 feet deep when they dug it by hand. Pretty amazing, the work that those men did back then to put that in place. So at the dedication of the facility on September 10th, 1897, oysters were a huge thing back then. And I really didn't understand why, but they called it the poor man's protein. It was really, they were just beginning to be harvested and shipped to the Midwest from out east and out west, both. But they were put on ice and shipped out here, and they became very popular. Probably for about 10 years, they were the main staple of any party. When you read the books, everything had something to do with oyster. They had oysters for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So that was kind of an interesting find there with the dedication and the menu. Also, who J.D. Tootloff was the caterer. Yeah. So this is the old building, I guess in its glory days. So down here on the ground level was the office space for the supervisor. And then this side was the living quarters. Upstairs, we had three, we still have them. There's 3 bedrooms upstairs. Above this is actually what they call the dance hall. So it's one giant room that covers the entire building, and they used to actually hold dances up there, gatherings. Large parties back then with dignitaries from around the area. And again, the hatchery was looked at as kind of like the showpiece of Wisconsin. There were people coming from all over to see it. One of the other things, and we can't figure out what it means, but up above even the dance hall, there were 2 bedrooms up here. And those bedrooms in the writings talk about servants' quarters. So, but we don't know whether they were servants for the hatchery workers, or were they servants for the superintendent. We're not sure. But you look at the deck on the top, the state seal was hand-carved wood, and right above the dormer there and below the deck. And then there was actually a full wraparound deck in the front and a basement under the entire place, which is actually below the level of Lake Superior, which is kind of interesting. But we do have a sump pump in there, so it's not watertight, I'll put it that way. So one other thing is you'll see in some of the other pictures, there's a lot of pictures of kids. And I would see these kids in the background, the foreground, climbing on things. And it was kind of aggravating to me to find out who these kids were, and I finally did. So this is in 1899, and that is Lawrence, Henry, and Esther Sykes. So that was the first superintendent's first 3 children. And they were literally in all sorts of pictures. There's actually some scribble marks that we find from them. So it's actually kind of interesting. I myself was a hatchery brat, just like probably Henry, Esther, and Lawrence. So I grew up on a fish hatchery, and I'm sure my dad was not happy all the time. So here's another picture. A lot of pictures that we'll go through. Different angle of it. This is when they started to clear the land, start building ponds. The inside of the building was actually completed long before the outdoor ponds and raceways were done. So they were incubating each one of these. Here is a row of incubators, and they would incubate the eggs and hatch them out, and they typically would only hold on to their fry for about 2 weeks, and then they'd ship them out. They'd ship them in these cans here, the milk cans. So they were hatching fish long before they were actually rearing juvenile fish up in the ponds. You see all the gentlemen there standing around getting their picture taken. This was them picking eggs. So they'd go through, they'd manually pick all the eggs, the dead eggs, and then somebody would come back behind them and weigh them down. They did things through, they didn't have the fancy digital scales that we have today, so he would do it volumetrically. So he'd pour so many eggs into a container that would measure out, and somebody would have to count those eggs to see how many fit in a liter. And then they'd use that number to continue to count the rest of the eggs in the group.
Where do the eggs come from?
So they would actually collect their eggs from the commercial fishermen. So a lot of the commercial fishers that were going out harvesting, the question was, where do the eggs come from? So they would, at that time, they would actually have commercial fishers go out catching their fish for sale, but then we would meet them and take them back to the hatchery and fertilize them and rear them there. Because the commercial fishermen at that time didn't have a use for the eggs.
I didn't know.
So another one that I've kind of looked at here, this young guy, and it's hard to see in the picture, but he looks very young to me. And I believe that is an Andrew Walcrest. And the reason why I say that is because he was 14 and the youngest person that went to work at the hatchery. And his dad worked there. And his dad, we'll get into it a little bit more, but his father wrote in the books that he made his son come and ask for a job from the supervisor, that he wouldn't do it for him. So I think that is him, because he does not look 18, 17 maybe. So this would be the first hatchery raceway that they put in place. Wooden flume, gravity feed from the red dam that's upstream, and it was tarred. They laid tongue and groove wood down that they milled right on site, and then they would actually tar it and waterproof it. Then the pond scraping began. And I can tell you that lasted 3 years. That looked and sounded like a painstaking, long process to go and drag. You know, everybody had their team of horse. Typically, the most I've read was 4 teams, and they would drag those ponds, and they made them up to 8 feet deep. And again, when you look at, if you are familiar with the horse and drag, they pretty much will only do flat ground. There's no shaping with the horse and drag, no the scrapers don't do banks. So it's their digging is their primary purpose, and pretty much their only function. Then stepped in Olaf. Olaf dug for days. I'll put it that way. His name was frequently used. He was the pond shaper. So he would actually shape those ponds, and I think he did all of them by himself, because I never saw anybody else's name entered in the books for shaping the ponds. And I'm surprised he doesn't have arms this big around. But yeah, he had to have been a tough man. But yeah, so he was out there shaping the ponds every day, and when he wasn't shaping the ponds, he was chopping firewood. There's one of the, when they're just about finished with the ponds. One of the interesting things you can see here, not a tree in sight out in front of the hatchery. That forest was pretty much denuded of trees at that point. And I think that's part of the reason why the Pike family was willing to part with it, was the fact that they'd already logged it, and it didn't have the timber value. Yeah, that would, I mean, when you look at the facility and you look at those decks on the front, I imagine just a beautiful, picturesque view of Pikes Bay. So there's another picture of the hatchery. This is the old building. These were barns and storage for the horses and hay, and also one of their hay fields that they had. This picture was actually taken from what we now know as the Pinehurst Inn. So this was actually taken from the upstairs of the Pinehurst Inn as the hatchery, which at that time was R.D. Pike's home. And that would be R.D. Pike's residence and his farm at the time. You can see the hatchery building in the background. That picture was taken, I'm sure, from up in the window, you know, facing the other way. No highway, of course. That was the road to, it was actually called the road to Pike residence. So I imagine this picture was taken roughly at Ski Hill Road, So this was the hatchery supply pond, supplied water, gravity feed through that wooden pipe down to the hatchery. So, and I say recently, but compared to 1896, it's recent. But about a few years ago, we found kind of a hidden cupboard up in the hatchery building. And inside that cupboard, it was completely full. It had been painted over. You couldn't really tell it was an actual cupboard. But it had been painted over, and we pried it open, and inside of it were these diaries. So that's how I know Olaf was out there digging and shaping. How many days it took to drag those ponds. Every day they would enter who was doing what. Typically what the weather was doing, they went as far as to say it was pleasant or cold. But they also would write in there when these employees would do what, where they would work. If somebody came to visit, so if the governor came, they put a note in there, they arrived on the train. But we found every diary from 1896 all the way to 1959. I've talked to a couple of supervisors, a couple of employees that were there in the 70s, and they never knew that those diaries were there. I brought a couple of them here tonight. They're in immaculate condition, wonderful condition, and very interesting reading material. So while I was reading, I started to jot down some of the names that were working, I'll say, in the first 10 years of the facility. A lot of the names, so we're talking from 1897, maybe 1910, I just started jotting down some names. A lot of those names you'll see up there today. I've had people come by, just recently I had somebody come by and ask about their grandfather, and their grandfather was there in 1921. We were able to find the day that he left and went to St. Croix Falls Hatchery in 1927. But yeah, you'll recognize a lot of the names you'll see are still around today. Still, the family members are still here. There's that Andrew Walquist. I think that's the young boy in the picture. Anybody see any names up there they recognize? So one of the interesting reads that I found in the diary, 1897, John Van Ness was sent to town with $5. He returned with 4 milk brooms, 4 hammer handles, 4 pitchfork handles, 2 axe handles, 10 pounds of number 20 ring nails. It might have been an Olson store. Right? 2 whisk brooms, 4 paintbrushes, 2 harness snaps, 2 thermometers, 1 ruler, toilet paper, and 40 cents in change. So, out of those finds, we also found their entire inventory of what they had, from their saddles, harnesses, the cost of them. But it did have the breakdowns. Every time somebody went to town to purchase something, they were told how much they went to town with, how much each item was, and how much change they came back with. So it was very detailed notes. And like I said, it's a great find, very impressive stuff to read. One of my favorite ones, the Housekeeper Library, modern fancy work. So I looked at this and I'm thinking, okay, Olaf was not reading the house, modern fancy work. I couldn't figure out why they would have this up in the cupboard. So I'm thumbing through it, and forever I could not figure it out. And it's like, is he like making doilies to put his coffee cup on? You know, I couldn't figure it out. And then I'll walk away here for a second. One day, while I was giving a tour, a lady said, well, are you really that dumb? I said, look, I could be. She said, fishnets. They were teaching them, using that book to teach how to make their fishnets. So, if you start looking at these things, the centers of them, the bottom of the bag, everything, this is all handmade. And I will tell you this, I found this today. So this was in the green box that has not seen daylight since probably 1921. It was it's in the old building. We find things every day up there. But this net was inside that box, and I thought, what a great example of modern fancy work. So that is why Olaf is probably reading that book. And it's up here as well. So then now it's like we switched from black and white photos. What left Darren do here? Messed something up. Why did I take a picture of a willow tree? The willow tree has history. Probably a lot more than what most people would even believe. So the way the story's read is that is called a weeping willow, Napoleon's weeping willow. So Napoleon, when he was held captive on the island of St. Helena, there were 2 willow trees that Bonaparte used to go and cry under. Those willow trees were scavenged and utilized, they'd take clippings from them once Bonaparte was buried underneath. So those trees, those clippings, were taken and given out to different events, different things, were dignitaries. One of them was when they actually took some clippings from the trees and took them to George Washington's grave. A French naval officer brought them over to plant at George Washington's gravesite. When we had our dedication, there were actually clippings, and they would allow people to go and take so many clippings a year. These willow trees, you've got to take clippings off, you've got to trim them, but they would allow these clippings to go out, and they were given so many to each state, and each state would dole them out to wherever they had an event. And the Bayfield Hatchery was one of those spots. So we have our willow trees, our direct descendants of the willow trees where Bonaparte was held captive. So that's why I've got the trees that have roots, I guess, if you want to say. A lot of history behind them. So there's a walking trail that goes along those that we maintain, and I'm hopeful that someday we'll put up a sign that kind of describes why those willow trees are important. And it's not, when you look it up, it's not that huge of a deal because those trees have been taken all over the country. Australia has a bunch of them now because of that. So a little bit of history about the trees that are on site. So the fish cutter. That there is the Badger one, as you can see in the background. There's the old building, and there's Henry S. Third Lawrence again. Flying around in the train, probably getting yelled at. So that was how we got our fish. Of course, no highway. Those fish were all loaded on, fish or eggs, were loaded onto the train and hauled all across the state and even across the country. So one of our first stockings of fish out of Bayfield was to Jenny Lake, Wyoming. Lake trout out of the Apostle Islands. So in 1913, they went to the Badger 2, which was quite a bit nicer. Cooking quarters up here. All these were fish tanks, sleeping quarters in the back. Underneath, it would haul 2,200 pounds of ice that they'd recirculate the water in the tanks. And we've got every record where that train crossed every bridge and where fish got dropped off into. So there's the Badger loading fish in Anago. And that's, you can see the fish cans, same as we have here. By the way, we still use these. We probably have close to 75 of those. And we still use them today. On our research boat, it's the only thing that will stick to the bottom of the boat when we're rocking and rolling. 5-gallon pails slide all over. Those are heavy enough, they just sit where they're at. So we still use them today. So there's the Badger 2 that has been restored. It served as a passenger car for a while down around Milwaukee area, and then there was the train museum purchased it back, and then they raised enough money, and through grants, they fully restored it. So those are the tanks inside, both sides. Little desk area. I think that was back to the sleeping quarters. Another picture of the hatchery, the fish ponds. Again, they're just starting to recover the forest back there. So one of the things with the hatchery at the time, they actually had a garden club. They manicured the place amazingly. The flower bed's still there. Actually, DOT tried to move it. I told them I'd lay down in front of it. And that was a battle. It was 6 inches over their easement. So yeah, that was a battle to maintain that. It is listed as historic. So that was the only way we got around it. I might have fudged a little on the paper. But this was a postcard. They made postcards of the facility. Like I said, it was kind of the highlight of the north at the time. Beautiful structure. So back then, they actually held weddings in the hatchery garden. Place where visitors came all the time. Still today, we see probably 3,000 to 5,000 visitors. I'd say 25% of them are really interested in the old building, more so than fish. We get a lot of people that come just to see the old building. Some more pictures of the manicured trees in the front. The roses. So we have the records of all the types of trees that were planted. Some I've never heard of. Gileads was one. And a lot of the trees were planted around the ponds for the shade. Try to keep the shade on the fish. Again, the manicured trees is absolutely amazing. There's that. So the highway now probably runs right over the top of this tree. And here it is today. So you can see the porch has been removed. It got rotten. The dormer, the rounded dormer, it was right here with the hand-carved state seal is gone. The deck is gone on the top. This is the interior of the building. It's actually much more, that disappeared. Much more in detail in person. You can see the lines that are carved into the brownstone. This brownstone was harvested between the hatchery and Whiting Road. And I believe there's a sign up that's in the bushes that say Karen's Quarry, but that is R.D. Pike's Quarry. It was on the plat books as R.D. Pike's Quarry back in the 1800s, so that's what it will remain in my mind. That's where all the brownstone was harvested for the hatchery and for the Pinehurst. There's the hand-carved state seal. So we took all that down. Well, I wasn't a part of it, but I believe it was in the 80s that it came down. It was just deteriorating too much, and they wanted to preserve the integrity of the state seal. That's the original paint job. I'm sure there's a little lead paint in there. That's the stairwell going up to the 3 bedrooms. And if you look through that door is actually the hatchery. And we still raise fish in it today. This is for all of our inland production. Our inland production is for lake trout, and it all goes to 7 different lakes over in Vilas and Iron County, Powell Lake, Trout Lake, Black Oak, and then we also do fish for Lake Geneva and Green Lake. So in 2011, the Pike family came for a family reunion, and we also had a dedication for the building. And the Pike family will be returning for another reunion this year in August. So that is Robin. That's another R.D. Pike. That's his brother, sister, and the rest are children or spouses. So there's the building, back in the glory day again. 1981, it was listed on the National Historic Registry. 1989 to the State Historic Registry. 2011, I was able to go to Madison and sit in front of the commission board and get it renamed the R.D. Pike Building after Robinson Durant Pike. So that, a lot of that has to do with saving the integrity of the building. Part of our problem is with the way our state statutes are and laws, is our money is funded through license sales and trout stamp dollars. When they made those things, they made it known that we cannot, not just us, but the DNR cannot spend money on things outside of fish culture. The front portion of that building is not fish culture. So we can protect the outside, but we can't do anything with improving or restoring the interior. So that's where I'm hopeful in 2024 that we can start our friends. Any questions?
Last statement.
The last statement. Friends group? So a friends group can start up like a nonprofit. Typically, I myself being the supervisor or the property manager, I can't start it up. But if a group or an organization wanted to come in and stake claim to the preservation of the old building, they could do that under a nonprofit, and then money could come in through donations or grant money and do a full restoration on that building. And then I can retire. Because that was part of the thing, looking at the building, that was one of my things. And Mr. Tim Davis over here knows that that was one of my goals, is to have that restored before I resign. Go ahead.
Has any archaeology been done on the site?
So we have a state archaeologist, and we have done quite a bit. No, there's no digging, but there's, we look at historical data, and there is a lot of history in the valley floor. Like I said, the Pike family moved there in 1855. They bought it from the American Fur Trading Company. There's also a cemetery on the grounds where in the writings it talked about how all of the headstones were removed and most of the bodies. So, but we do, so with our archaeologists, anything that we do to that building or around that building, we have to have it approved. And everything that's done to that building has to be in like period of time. And I'll say, I think there's only 2 windows on that entire facility that have been replaced that I know of. Most of them are all original. Is there any? Go ahead.
Back in the 1980s, that building was really going downhill because the state wasn't doing anything about it. And we did form a nonprofit at that time.
Correct.
And once there was a bit of interest, it seemed to kick things in. So it's really nice to see that there's so much interest and concern about it today. The cemetery site is actually on private.
It is, the road, yeah,
Yeah.
it goes up through.
Yeah, and most bodies and stuff were moved, but there was one stone left, and it was last located in the 1930s.
Oh.
It was Mrs. Stunts from Ashland, her descendants came and located it. There was a picture of the stone in the paper, but we were never able to find it after in more recent years.
Okay.
When like 40 years ago, I used to be able to find the site of the American Fur Company mill fairly well. And then the state decided they were gonna do a lot of riprap along the stream. And they did ask for input, and I wrote them a letter, and I said, look out for that site. But boy, what they did really did not help with, it really covered up a lot of the details of it.
And
No.
I can still easily find it. There's a lot of remnants up there from it. There's also things like block and tackle pulleys up in the trees. So there's some trees up there that I would say are probably original growth, never been cut. And the reason why I say that is because every one of them has a fork in the top. And I had a gentleman that was telling me that the reason for that is they didn't harvest those trees because they weren't straight timber. So they left them. And they are all very large pines. And in some of those pines, there are articles that are hanging up in those pine trees. And one of the old writings brings me back to the diaries. It stated in there, and this was in 1899, and it stated that one of the gentlemen went up to go catch brook trout to spawn, and he found a really old gun grown into a tree in 1899. So how old was that tree?
And I'm sure you've seen the old tanks and runways of Birch Run.
Yep, yep. So those aren't as old as the Pike family hatchery as well. But yeah, those raceways are still there, still has a spring boiling up right in the
Yeah,
middle
that's
of it.
really cool up there.
Yep.
The older pictures that you have, are they from fish hatchery records that you found, or did you got to do a lot of search for them?
Both. So I've done a lot of searching on my own. Also Bob Nelson, and he's been a great source of information. And we've been exchanging stuff for probably the last 15 years. So it's just been a combination of research and help from others.
Does the Pullman fish are still smell like fish?
I have not seen it since it's been restored, other than pictures. I would like to, but I have not made it down there. Freedom, Wisconsin, I think is where it was. It sounds too far south for me. Ashland's about as far south as that.
And what's this
Birch Run, so it was another facility, another hatchery in there, and they utilized that for many years. And It was part of the Pike family and also part where Isaac Wing owned. So there were some springs upstream of there, and still today it's just boiling out of the ground in very, very cold water. And the water there was so cold, that was part of the reason why they brought that, chose the hatchery location for Bayfield, was to utilize that cold water because it delayed the hatching of the eggs, and it allowed them to get them onto the train after the snow melted. So once the winter was over, those eggs were finally coming, to where they needed to be shipped out, and then they could get them out, because the water was so cold, it just slowed the maturity down. But we utilize those ponds and the dam. Downstream from those ponds, there's actually, you can see the remnants of the dam. And they had that dammed up into a very large, I think it was a 6-acre pond.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask about that pond. So, was that the Red Dam?
No, Red Dam is on Pikes Creek. So that is at the end of the driving road where the turnaround is, where the walking trail begins.
No, okay. So that's where the Red Dam is?
Correct, yep.
Okay, so where's this other pond?
The pond's no longer there, the dam's no longer in use, so they tore it out and restored it back to the natural stream. But you can see remnants of it going up the side of the valley floor.
How did it happen that at the same time we're cutting down all the forests and digging out all the brownstone, we chose to have fish hatcheries to renew the fish? That just seems contrary to that western expansion.
Well, looking back at it, yes, it was. But our main harvest was out here in Lake Superior at the time. Recreational fishers were fishing recreationally in the streams, but Lake Superior was being harvested for its lake trout, whitefish, herring. Those were really big fish back then. They still are today, the whitefish, the herring. But yeah, they were being over-harvested out in the lake, and that's why they started the fish hatcheries up here.
Okay.
So they could boost those numbers and keep the commercial fishery going.
I also want to ask you, when I was young, there was a place out there where they kept the sturgeon.
Yep.
It's still there. So how long did they do that?
They did that all the way up into the 80s, and I believe they tried it again in the 90s, but when they put fish in there in the recent years, the fish were removed. They were stolen.
Oh.
Yep.
What was the diameter of the wood supply line? When are you still using that?
No. So there was 2 pipelines. The one from Birch Run, which is to the north of us, that was a 16-inch pipeline. And the one that came from Red Dam down to the hatchery was, I believe, a 32-inch pipeline. And it was all hemlock, tarred, and then wrapped and banded.
How long was it in use for?
Ooh. That I'm not positive about. If I had to guess, I would say probably until the 70s, when they built the new building in 75. And we still see it, it's there. Sometimes it springs leaks and washes a little gravel out, and we can see it.
You haven't told us anything about the rural hatchery. When was that built and where does fish go?
So, the talk was on Bayfield. I can come back for a rural talk if you want. But the rural hatchery was built in 1929, and it was built by the Douglas County Fish and Game League and assisted by the Conservation CCC group. Yep. The fish, they go into Lake Superior or Lake Michigan.
Is Red Dam the one we walk up to where this walking trail starts?
Correct. Yep.
Used to have a big valve there that let creek water into the hatchery system.
Yep, we still use it today, yeah. We typically don't put the boards in the dam because we allow for the anadromous fish to go upstream and spawn naturally. We leave a little bit ahead so we can maintain the pond's water level. down at the hatchery, because we don't use the ponds outside anymore. It's now 100% indoor facility in the main building and the old building. So all those outdoor ponds are for our waste treatment. So the fecal material from the waste inside the building comes out, settles in the ponds before it goes out to the creek.
So there's no, I mean, I used to see huge fish in those ponds. There's no fish in them.
They're still there, yep. We feed them every day. They're kind of our show and tell fish. We don't use them for anything other than kids fishing day or some type of event.
I know you mentioned it earlier in your talk, but where specifically does your output go now?
Where does our
Output go now?
When you talk output, are you talking water or fish?
Your fish.
The fish?
Yeah.
So our main building, the newer building, the one that was built in 1975, those fish all go into Lake Superior or Lake Michigan. And then the old building, the RD Pike building, those fish either go to near Woodruff and Rhinelander, they're inland lakes. So Woodruff, Rhinelander area, and then we also do Lake Geneva and Green Lake. So we have 4 different strains of lake trout that we use. Lake Superior strain is in the big newer building, and the inland production is in the old building. Any other questions?
What's your theory about the cupboard and why it was covered up?
I don't know. I don't have one, and I'm glad they did, because I'm glad I found it. Yeah, I don't know why they did. Maybe they just got lazy at some point and didn't want to cut in everything. But there are hidden things in that building. There's holes. We've found flasks. I've got a thermos on my desk. I was just looking up the date of it today because I was curious. Production of it was 1899 to, I believe it was 1903, was that specific thermos, cork top, and Universal was the name of the brand. But it had a bullet hole in the top. And I just thought, all these little hidey holes, my thought was somebody was probably going up there taking a little snip on cold nights or whatever. Because there's a lot of places to hide.
When you get the fish eggs and you hold them until they're ready for fertilizing, how do you fertilize them?
So today, are you talking today's time?
Yes.
So right now what we do is we go out in Lake Superior, we set gill nets, and we collect the adults, we tag them, we determine whether they're male or female, we take lengths of them, we throw them back in the water if they're not ready to spawn, but if they're ready to spawn, we go ahead and strip the eggs out of the females, and then we just take the same number of males and fertilize the eggs with the males. So we'll squeeze them right into the same container, mix them up with a little bit of water, and we actually disinfect them with iodine. So we immediately after we fertilize the eggs, we put them into iodine, and it disinfects the egg. We bring them back to the hatchery, disinfect them one more time before we bring them into the building. Essentially, it's the same thing has to happen back then, but back then it was the commercial fishermen were a huge help. They really assisted us in getting our eggs. We didn't have a boat back then.
Could you tell us what that green box is?
Okay, yep. So the green box, again, what you see here, this was used to transport the eggs, not fish, but eggs, around the state and even across the country. These boxes are what were used to stock salmon into Lake Michigan in the 1800s, brown trout when they were brought out here on trains. And when we're done, you're more than welcome to come up and look at this stuff, pick it up, touch it, just be gentle. But those boxes have those trays that you'll see here, and we put 10,000 eggs in each one of those trays. There's 11 across the top of the eggs. Eggs don't need eggs don't need water to survive. They just need air. They need to be kept cool and moist as it. And so that ice would just drizzle down over the top of them as they were traveling on. That box there, I was literally trying to find something to bring here tonight, so I went up in the old building, and we have probably 75 of those boxes, and I had to wash it off of the back guano. But that's the original burlap that was in there, and in that it's sealed up good, and then that's where the netting came from, was inside that box as well. It still has the train depot tag on it. I believe the date on it is 1915, as far as I can tell. It's hard for me to read it. The diaries are up here. This is one of the cans that we use on the boat every year to take our eggs. And here's the housekeeper modern fancy room. Go ahead.
Is the bat population coming back at that building?
It is. And while I was up there getting that stuff, I found where they're coming in at. So the bat, we used to have, at one point, we had an estimate of about 12,000 bats. We were able to put one-way on them. It's a little screen you put on there where they can fly out, but they can't fly back in. But the first thing we had to do is put all the bat houses up around the hatchery. And then we put the one-ways on, kicked them out, and now they're starting to move back in, which is a good thing, but it does make a mess. And they stay upstairs in the loft, they don't come in.
Do you know when the Salmo depot was built and when it ceased to be there?
I do not, but I have a feeling we'll find that out next week on the train wreck one. The presentation here, I'm excited about that. I honestly don't know when the Salmo depot was put into place. Any other questions? And again, more than welcome to come out and take a look at the stuff. And then also I've got a card on the back table at the back of the room if anybody wants to sign up to be on the Friends group.